A woman in white walked past the glass, calm as if the past no longer knew her name. Behind her, the man who replaced her looked straight at her and saw only a stranger. How long can stolen credit stay hidden? Filled still. For just one more second, Mrs. Ellison. Helen Marlowe said it softly, with 2 silver pins held between her lips and one hand smoothing the side seam of a pale blue evening gown. The fitting room was full of movement behind her. Garment bags, breathing open and closed, bracelets clicking against champagne glasses, polite laughter floating in from the front of the atelier. Outside the tall curtain, forests, carried easily, warm, and polished, the way it always did when there were wealthy women to charm and donors to impress. Helen didn't look up. The waistline was still half an inch off. The gown had taken her 3 nights to finish. Not 3 pleasant nights of music and coffee, but 3 narrow, aching nights after the shop closed, when the staff went home, and the air conditioning hummed over bolts of silk, stacked like sleeping bodies. She had recut the bodice twice. He had changed the shoulder line, after noticing Mrs. Ellison kept lifting one hand toward her collarbone, the way women did when they felt exposed, but didn't want to say so. Helen had softened the neckline, hidden the support and the lining, and put a tiny hand stitch beneath the left side seam, where no one would ever see it. That was how she worked. Quietly, precisely. Leaving her name where only the fabric knew. There, Helen murmured, taking the last pin from her mouth and setting it into place. You'll be able to sit, breathe, and dance. In that order, Mrs. Ellison smiled at her reflection. But before she could answer, the curtain swept open, the sound. Warren stepped in as if the room had been waiting for him. He wore a dark suit and the easy expression of a man who had never once had to thread a needle under bad lighting. Beside him stood 2 women Helen recognized from the committee, and next to him, half a step too close, was Brielle Carter. Brielle was young, bright, and dressed as if every room were a stage. Her hair was pulled back in a careless knot that had probably taken an hour. She held a tablet in one hand. Though Helen had never seen her sketch, measure, cut, baste, fit, steam, rescue a hem 5 minutes before a donor walked out the door. Still, she smiled like someone who had already been introduced as the future. My goodness, Warren said, his voice filling the room, is exactly the line I was hoping for. Mrs. Ellison turned, delighted. Warren, it's beautiful. You've done it again. Helen's fingers paused on the pin cushion, only for a second. Then she lowered her hand and stepped back because the client was still standing on a raised platform, and a professional did not bleed into the dress. Warren gave a modest little laugh. We wanted something elegant but not stiff, feminine but not fussy. He glanced toward Brielle. That's the direction we're moving in now. Cleaner, younger. Brielle nodded, as if she had spent all night inside the seams with Helen. Helen kept her face still. She had learned, for the years, that a woman could lose a great deal in a room without anyone noticing, as long as she didn't raise her voice. Mrs. Ellison turned slightly, admiring herself in the mirror. Well, for whoever touched the waist deserves a medal. I look 10 years younger, Warren smiled. That's the Marlowe touch. The Marlowe touch. Not Helen's touch. Not her eye, not her hands. The quiet hour when she had understood what Mrs. Ellison was afraid to ask for. Just the Marlowe touch, broad enough for Warren to stand under, broad enough for Helen to disappear inside, feeding. She bent to collect a fallen pin from the carpet. When she straightened, Brielle was looking at the hem of the gown with the bright seriousness of someone trying to look useful. Maybe for the final version, Brielle said, we could make it a little more dramatic. Something with a slit. A high one. It would photograph better. Mrs. Ellison's smile faltered. Helen saw it immediately, the small tightening around the mouth, drifting again toward the collarbone. No, Helen said, before she could stop herself. The room cooled. Warren's eyes moved to her, not sharply. That would have been easier. He looked at her with a patient, public calm that made her feel childish. Before she had even explained, Helen softened her voice. Mrs. Ellison asked, for movement, not exposure. The dress is for a charity dinner, not a red carpet. Brielle gave a small laugh, airy and harmless on the surface. of course. I just think we need to start considering vision, not only alterations. The word landed cleanly, dottolations. Helen felt it settle on her shoulders like dust. Warren stepped forward and touched Mrs. Ellison's elbow with practiced grace. Helen is excellent with structure, he said. No one handles the backroom details like she does. Brielle is helping us think about where the brand is going. The brand. The backroom. Details. Helen looked at her husband, and for one strange moment she remembered him years earlier, sitting on the floor of their first rented studio, asking her if satin could be saved after water damage. He had not known then how to speak about fabric, known how women stood differently when a dress made them feel safe. He had not known donors, committees, fittings, or the gentle lies that made wealthy clients trust a mirror again. She had taught him all of it. He was using the language she had given him to move her out of the room. Mrs. Ellison glanced between them, uncomfortable but too polite, to enter a marriage disguised as a business meeting. Well, she said softly, trust you all. That was the trouble, Helen thought. People trusted rooms, they trusted lighting, labels, confident men in beautiful suits. They trusted the person speaking loudest near the mirror, your istim. They rarely trusted the woman kneeling at the hem. Helen finished the fitting without another correction. She marked the final adjustments, helped Mrs. Ellison step down, and carried the gown back toward the work table. The silk was warm from the woman's body. It felt almost alive in her arms. In the front room, Warren accepted another compliment. In the workroom, Helen laid the gown flat and turned it inside out, the lining open beneath her hands, neat and pale and secret. She checked the seam where her tiny mark lay hidden. A careful stitch, nothing more. A habit from years ago, when she had still believed private pride was enough. Her front desk. She heard Brielle ask where her name would appear on the event program. Warren answered without lowering his voice. We're updating all that tonight. Looked toward the small brass plaque near the entry wall. For years, it had read Marlowe Atelier in elegant black letters. Beneath it, in smaller type, the old printed cards had listed Warren and Helen as creative partners, equal in the way the world saw them perhaps, but equal enough to keep breathing. That evening, after the last client left and the champagne glasses were carried away, Warren called her into the front room. Brielle was already there, standing beside the desk with her tablet pressed to her chest. The new sample boards were spread across the table. New fonts, new colors, new photographs. The kind of clean beauty that looked expensive because it had not yet touched real life. Warren did not sit. That was his way of making decisions feel finished before they began. We need to talk about the direction of the atelier, he said, stood across from him, still wearing the black dress she worked in, a thread clinging to her sleeve. He spoke gently. That was what made it worse. The business is changing. The women coming in now want more than fittings. Her story, a feeling, a point of view. Helen looked at Brielle's tablet, then at Warren. And I don't have one? He sighed, as if she had made him tired. You have skill. No one is taking that away from you, but he was. He was taking it even as he named it. We need you in production for a while, he continued. Less client-facing, less design conversation. Brielle will handle the visual direction. Brielle's smile tried to be sympathetic and failed. Helen felt something inside her go very still. What about the committee dresses? She asked. Brielle will present them. The Ellison gown? Warren's eyes flickered. Atelier will present it. There it was again. The large, polished word that could swallow a woman whole. Helen folded her hands, not because she was calm, but because they had begun to shake. I made that gown, she said. Warren's expression tightened, only slightly. You worked on it. I made it, Helen. His voice lowered, smooth and warning. Don't do this. Not in front of Brielle. Not in front of Brielle. Not in front of clients. In front of donors. Not in front of anyone who might hear the truth and find it inconvenient. Brielle shifted her weight. I don't want to step on anyone's toes, she said, while standing in Helen's place. Helen almost laughed. The sound would have broken something she still needed, intact. Warren walked to the entry wall and removed the printed card beneath the brass plaque. He did it carefully, with 2 fingers, and as if taking down a notice that had simply expired. In its place, he slid a new card into the holder, Marlowe Atelier Creative Direction. Warren Marlowe and Brielle Carter. For a moment, Helen could not read it. The letters blurred and sharpened, then blurred again. Her name was gone, not crossed out, not argued over, gone neatly, in good taste, on heavy cream paper. The end. The room was quiet enough for her to hear the soft click of the card. Settling behind the glass, Warren turned back to her. "This is business. Please don't make it personal, Helen." Helen looked at the gown bag hanging near the workroom door. Inside, it was Mrs. Ellison's blue dress, the waistline perfect, the lining clean, the hidden stitch waiting where no one would ever think to look. And she looked at Warren, the man who had built a throne out of her hands. She did not shout. She did not tear down the card. She did not give Brielle the satisfaction of seeing her break in the front room. She walked to the workroom and took down 3 garment bags from the side rack. They were not finished pieces for clients. They were old samples, discarded muslins, shaped ideas Warren had never cared to study because they did not shine yet. She folded them over her arm. From the drawer beneath her table, she took her small tin of needles, her best shears, packet of labels she had never been brave enough to use. Warren followed her to the doorway. "Helen, don't be dramatic." She paused with her hand on the work table. All those years, she had believed silence was dignity. Maybe it had been. Or maybe it had only made her easier to erase. Still, she gave him the only answer she could manage. "I'm not being dramatic," she said. "I'm leaving." Brielle said nothing. Warren said her name once, with love, but with irritation, as if she had wrinkled a dress 5 minutes before delivery. Helen walked past the brass plaque without looking at the new card again. The front door closed softly behind her, or too softly for what had just ended. Outside, Houston's evening air was warm and heavy. She stood beside her car, with the garment bags over one arm and the little tin of needles pressed against her ribs. Her name was no longer on the wall. Her marriage, though no one had said the word yet, had been reduced to a business adjustment. But in the lining of the gowns she had made, in seams Warren had never bothered to feel. There were small marks he did not know existed. Helen put the garment bags in the back seat carefully, as if they were sleeping children. Then she drove away from the atelier, carrying with her a few unfinished dresses, a box of labels, and the first pieces of a truth her husband had never thought to fear. By the time Helen reached Galveston, the garment bags in the back seat had slumped against one another like tired guests after a party. June opened the door before Helen could knock. She took one look at her sister's face, then at the 3 black bags hanging over Helen's arm, and did not ask the question most people would have asked first. Ask what Warren had done. She did not ask whether Helen had cried. She simply stepped aside and said, "The coffee's fresh. Bathroom's down the hall. You can fall apart after you eat." That was June. Practical kindness, ribbon tied around it. Helen set the garment bags across the back of a kitchen chair and put her small tin of needles on the table. It made a soft sound against the wood, hardly louder than a breath. Still, she heard it. Sound seemed to say, "This is what you have left." For the first few days, she moved through June's house, like a guest who had overstayed by years. She folded towels that did not need folding. She washed a coffee mug as soon as it was empty. She slept badly in the spare room, waking before dawn with her hands curled as if they were still holding fabric. Each time she opened her eyes, she saw the new card in the atelier wall holder, cream paper, black lettering. Her name removed so neatly it almost felt polite. June did not push her to talk. She put food in front of her. She left clean sheets on the bed. She cleared a corner of the sunroom and dragged in an old work table with one leg that wobbled, unless a book was wedged beneath it. "You need a place for your hands," June said. Helen looked at the table, then away. "I know what I need." "Yes, you do," June said. "You're just too tired to admit it." A week later, June came home with 2 garment bags from a local charity closet that collected used wedding gowns and formal dresses for women who could not afford new ones. One gown had a broken zipper, the other had a torn lining and a yellowing ribbon at the waist. Helen stared at them as if June had placed a test in front of her. "I'm not ready to sew for people," she said. June put the bags over the back of a chair. "Sew for people. Sew for the zipper. The zipper didn't do anything to you." It was such a plain thing to say that Helen almost smiled. That night, she sat at the old table with the broken zipper laid open under the lamp. The house was quiet, except for the soft click of June putting dishes away in the kitchen. Helen threaded a needle from the little tin she had carried out of Houston. Her fingers knew what to do before the rest of her did. First stitch hurt, not her hand, her pride. She heard Brielle's voice again, light and careless, calling her work alterations. She heard Warren's smooth correction, backroom details. She saw the front room of the atelier, clients, the champagne, the polished card with her name gone. For a moment, Helen put the needle down. June appeared in the doorway with a dish towel over one shoulder. "Too much?" Helen shook her head, but was not quite true. "It's only a zipper." "No," June said. "It's the first thing you've touched since you left that place without letting him decide what it means." Then she went back to the kitchen. Helen looked at the dress again. The woman who would wear it did not care about River Oaks. She would not know Warren's smile, or Brielle's tablet, or the polite language people used when they were stealing something from you. She needed a zipper that closed smoothly. She needed a dress that did not make her feel ashamed of wanting to look beautiful. So Helen picked up the needle. The next day, she fixed the torn lining. The day after that, she adjusted a waist. More dresses arrived from the charity closet, not grand pieces, not society gowns, just tired satin, loose beads, missing hooks, sleeves that needed mercy. Helen worked slowly at first. She told herself she was only keeping busy. She told herself small work did not count. But the women who came to pick up the dresses stood differently when they left. One touched the bodice of a simple ivory gown and whispered, "Fits like it was waiting for me." Another laughed in surprise when a hem fell, exactly where it should. An older woman, picking up a navy dress for her granddaughter's wedding, pressed both hands to her mouth and looked away before thanking Helen. Those moments did not erase what Warren had done. They did something quieter. They gave Helen back a little weight in the world. She began to sleep deeper. She began to eat without June watching her fork. She began to keep a small notebook near the sewing table, jotting down measurements, fabric notes, little reminders about how each woman stood when she was nervous. Her handwriting steadied before her heart did. Still, shame waited for her in small places. It came when a client asked, "Did you used to have your own shop?" It came when Helen reached for one of her old labels and stopped, and unable to make herself sew her name into a dress meant for someone else. It came when she heard Warren's name mentioned at a charity lunch on the radio, his voice cheerful and confident as he spoke about the future of Marlowe Atelier. Helen turned the radio off and sat very still. From the kitchen, June said, "You don't have to listen to him own the whole room." Helen looked down at the dress in her lap. "He already did." "No," June said. "He owned the microphone." "That's not the same thing." Helen did not answer. But that evening, she opened the packet of labels she had taken from the atelier and placed one beside her pin cushion. She did not sew it in, not yet. But she let it sit there where she could see it. The dress that changed everything came in on a humid afternoon at the charity closet near the edge of town. Helen had gone with June to pick up a few donated gowns that needed work before the weekend. Most were ordinary, bridesmaid dress with pulled seams, a mother of the bride jacket with loose buttons, a cream dress with a stain near the hem. Then a volunteer handed Helen a long garment bag and said, "This one's older, but good quality. I think it belonged to Mrs. Porter." Her family donated a few things. Helen's fingers tightened on the hanger. Mrs. Adeline Porter had been one of the first women in Houston society who had treated Helen as more than Warren's quiet wife. Years earlier, she had come into the atelier after a long illness, thinner than she wanted to be and angry at every mirror in the building. Warren had been charming, of course, But it was Helen who had noticed Mrs. Porter kept pulling at her sleeves. Helen who had built softness into the bodice. Helen who had made the dress protect rather than display her. Helen did not say any of that in the charity closet. She only nodded and carried the garment bag to the car. That night, after June had gone to bed, Helen laid the dress across the work table. It was deep green, the color of shaded gardens after rain. Age had softened it, but the bones were good. Helen recognized the inside before she fully recognized the outside. Finished waist stay, the reinforced side seam, the small hidden stitch beneath the lining. Her stitch. She sat down slowly. The lining had torn near the left hip, enough that she needed to open it further to repair the stress point. She reached for her seam ripper, then stopped. For reasons she could not have explained, she felt as if she were disturbing something private. Carefully, she loosened the threads. Something flat slipped against her fingers. At first she thought it was an old receipt. Then she eased it out and saw a small folded note, tucked between the lining and the outer fabric, with one of Helen's hand-sewn labels. Not the Atelier label. Hers. The kind she had ordered years ago and rarely used. Helen unfolded the paper. The handwriting was thin but steady. Helen read the first line and had to put the note down. Across the table, the little tin of needles sat open. The lamp hummed softly. The green dress lay between her hands like a witness. She picked up the note again and read it all the way through. Mrs. Porter had written that Warren might have owned the room, but Helen had made her brave enough to enter it. She had written that a good dress did not make a woman younger or richer or more admired. It made her feel for one evening that she did not have to apologize for being seen. And at the bottom, to super sound. In a line that blurred before Helen could stop it, Mrs. Porter had written that Helen was the one who had made the dress. Helen pressed her fingertips to the label tucked inside the fold. For weeks, he had been living, as if Warren had taken the truth with him when he took her name off the wall. But here, hidden where no guest at a gala would ever look, was proof that someone had known. Someone had seen the hands. Behind the beauty, someone had cared enough to leave the truth where only Helen would find it when she needed it most. June found her still at the table near midnight. She did not ask why Helen was crying. He came closer, read the note, and covered her mouth with one hand. "Oh, honey," June whispered. Helen looked at the green dress, the opened lining, the small label, the careful words left behind by a woman who was no longer there to speak them aloud. For the first time since leaving Houston, the shame inside her shifted. It did not vanish. It changed shape. It became a question. If one dress had carried the truth all this time, how many others had been holding it too? The question stayed with Helen long after the green dress was folded back into its garment bag. For 2 mornings, she worked without touching the little note again. She made coffee. She repaired a loose sleeve. She stitched a row of pearl buttons onto a borrowed wedding dress for a woman who kept apologizing for wanting it to look new. But every time Helen's fingers found the inside of a seam, she wondered what else had been hidden in places no one thought to look. On the 3rd morning, June set a plate of toast beside the sewing table and said, "You're staring at that dress like it's about to speak." Helen looked up from the old green fabric. Maybe it already did. June did not smile. She pulled out the chair across from her. Then listen properly was how it began. Not with a plan, not with revenge. Just with Helen opening a notebook and writing down the names she could remember. Mrs. Porter had been first. Then there was Mrs. Ellison, with the blue charity gown, a widow from the garden club, who had needed a black dress softened at the shoulders. A young mother whose wedding gown had been remade after childbirth, changed her body. Retired teacher, who cried when Helen moved a waistline without making her feel ashamed. At first, Helen wrote only initials. She was afraid full names would make it look like she was building a case, Defia sound, and the thought made her stomach tighten. She did not want to be the bitter wife people whispered about over lunch. She did not want to be another woman with a story no one wanted to hear because it made the room uncomfortable. June watched her draw a line through one name, then write it again. You're not accusing anybody, June said. You're checking your own work. Helen ran her thumb over the edge of Mrs. Porter's note. If they think I'm pathetic, then they don't deserve to be on the list. That afternoon, Helen made the first call. Her voice stayed calm. She did not mention Warren. She did not mention Brielle, a sound. She simply asked whether the woman still had the dress Helen had fitted years before, and whether she would be willing to look at the inside seams with her, feel a bite. There was a pause on the other end, long enough for Helen to regret the call. Then the woman said, very quietly, I wondered when you were going to ask. One dress came back in a white box tied with ribbon, or arrived in a dry cleaning bag with an old event program tucked inside. A third was brought in person by a woman who sat at June's kitchen table and cried before Helen even opened the zipper. The little sunroom began to fill, messily. Helen could not bear mess. She hung each dress carefully, labeled each hanger, and placed every photograph, receipt, and handwritten note into a folder. She did not call them proof, not yet. She called them memories, made it easier to breathe. But the memories had breathed. But the memories had weight inside the bodice of a silver gown. She found the same hidden support she remembered building after the client confessed she had not worn anything sleeveless in years. Beneath the hem of a navy dress, she found her own tiny stitch, still holding after so many wearings. One woman brought a faded photograph from a fundraiser and tapped the image of herself in a cream dress. He told everyone he designed it, she said. But you were the one who took the sleeves apart after I said I hated my arms. I never forgot that. Helen lowered her eyes. Compliments had become dangerous things to her, yes. They warmed and hurt at the same time. By the end of the week, June's practical confidence had turned into a kind of quiet guard duty. She answered the door. When Helen's hands were full, she made asks of old programs. She put tea in front of women who arrived stiff with embarrassment and left with their shoulders lowered. You see? June said, one evening, watching Helen pin a label beside Mrs. Porter's note. This isn't you chasing the past. Past is knocking on your door. Still, there was one name Helen hesitated to write, Nora Ellis. Nora had chaired more charity events than Helen could count. She knew everyone who mattered in those rooms. She had worn Helen's work. She had praised it privately and praised Warren publicly. Helen did not hate her for that. Social courage was easy to admire and hard to practice, but Nora also had the one thing Helen needed now, the sound. A room where the truth could be seen without Helen having to shout. They met in a quiet cafe halfway between the life Helen had left and the life she was trying to build. Nora arrived in a pale blouse, pearls at her throat, and guilt already sitting in her eyes. She looked older than Helen remembered, not in a cruel way, but in the way people look when they have carried a polite silence too long. Helen, she said, taking both her hands, that have called you. Helen did not say yes. She did not say no. She only sat. Nora ordered tea she barely touched. Helen opened the folder and placed 3 photographs on the table, then the notes, then the small copies of labels and stitches. She did not rush. She explained each dress the way she had made it, line by line, layer by layer. Nora listened with her hand at her mouth. When Helen finished, the cafe felt too quiet. I knew some of it, Nora admitted. Not all. But enough that I should have said something. Helen looked at the folder. I'm not asking you to ruin anyone. Then what are you asking? Helen took a breath. It was the part that frightened her most, because saying it aloud made it real. I'm asking for a table at the gala. Not a speech, not an accusation. Just the dresses, their linings, their dates, their stories. People recognize the work. They can decide what it means. Nora looked toward the window. Outside, late afternoon traffic moved past in a slow silver stream. For a moment, Helen could see the calculation on the older woman's face. Donors, committees, friendships, Warren's smile, the betterness of truth in a room built for elegance. Then Nora closed the folder with care and rested her palm on top of it. I can give you the table, she said. But Helen, once those dresses are in the room, I can't control what happens. Helen almost smiled. Or can Warren? For the first time, Nora's face changed. Not into triumph, into relief. After that, Helen worked differently. The white suit began as a length of fabric June had once bought and never used. Bridal white, not soft or apologetic. It had body, it held a line. Helen cut it in the sunroom with Mrs. Porter's green dress hanging nearby, the folder on the table, June pretending not to watch too closely from the kitchen doorway. "You're making armor," June said. Helen shook her head. "No, I'm making something that fits." She sewed it slowly, with the care she had once poured into gowns for other women. A clean jacket, a narrow waist, trousers that moved without asking permission. Inside the lining, she placed one small label with her own name on it. Afternoon before the gala, Helen drove back into Houston. She did not go to the old atelier, not directly. She parked near the row of polished storefronts and walked along the glass, carrying no folder, no announcement, asking for no one's attention. The white suit caught the late light with quiet confidence. Her hair was pinned back. Her hands were steady. In the window beside her, reflection of the street stretched long and bright. Then she saw them behind her. Warren and Brielle were coming in out of a boutique, his hand at her back, her laugh quick and practiced. Warren looked well-dressed, well-rested, certain of himself. Brielle carried a garment bag over one arm and glanced at her own reflection as they walked. Helen kept moving. For one suspended second, Warren's eyes passed over the woman in white. No recognition, no flicker, unease. He saw the suit, the posture, the calm, and never connected any of it to the woman he had left behind, in a workroom, with her name removed from the wall. Brielle looked too, then looked away. Helen watched them in the glass, not turning around, not slowing down, not giving them the scene they would have known how to dismiss. Her pulse beat hard once, then settled. She had been afraid of this street, afraid of the windows, the clothes, the kind of rooms where Warren knew how to own the air. But the woman reflected in the glass did not look like someone asking to be let back in. She looked like someone arriving exactly on time. Behind her, Warren and Brielle continued down the sidewalk, still unaware. Ahead of her, the night of the gala waited. The gala did not begin with raised voices. That was what made it dangerous. Began with the soft scrape of chairs, the low music, the careful smiles of women who knew how to greet one another without revealing what they had heard. Helen stood near the far side of the ballroom, beside the long display table Nora had given her, and kept her hands folded lightly in front of her white suit. The dresses were already there. Not hidden, not dramatic, not thrown into the room like accusations. They stood on plain forms beneath warm light. Each one turned just enough to reveal a part of its lining. Near every gown was a small card with a date, a name, and a few clean words about the woman who had worn it. No speeches, insults, just silk, thread, and the parts of a dress that most people never bothered to see. Nora passed behind her and murmured, "Are you all right?" Helen looked at the first dress, Mrs. Porter's green one, placed beneath the glass beside it. "Not yet," she said, "but I'm steady." Across the room, Warren was laughing. He had Brielle at his side, glittering and pleased, her hand resting near his sleeve, as if they were already being photographed. Warren looked exactly as he always had in rooms like this. Calm, generous, admired. He accepted greetings with a tilted head and an easy smile, realizing that the room had begun to turn, slowly and silently, toward the table by the wall. Brielle noticed first. Her smile thinned as she saw the dresses. Then she saw Helen. For a second, there was recognition in her face. Only annoyance, as if some other woman had been given better lighting. Then her eyes moved to the white suit, the cut, the clean line of the jacket. Something uncertain crossed her expression. Warren followed her gaze. Helen did not move toward him. She did not call his name. She simply reached for the edge of the green dress's lining and turned it open with 2 fingers, revealing the small hand-sewn label and the stitch beneath it. Nora stepped to the front of the display, her voice gentle but clear enough to carry. "Tonight's exhibit is called The Work Beneath the Work," she said then. "It honors the unseen hands behind dresses that helped many women in this room feel seen." A hush moved through the ballroom. Warren's smile remained, but it stopped belonging to his face. Nora did not look at him. Helen Marlowe has prepared the display. The name landed quietly. That was all. No thunder, no accusation. Just Helen's name, spoken in a room that had once swallowed it. Warren crossed the room with Brielle half a step behind him, dipped his voice low, the way men did when they wanted anger to sound like reason. "Helen," he said, "what exactly do you think you're doing?" Helen looked at him, with the calm she had sewn into every seam for weeks, showing the work. "This is not the place." "No," she said. "It's exactly the place." Brielle looked at the first card, then the next. "These are old pieces, archival things." "Warren, this is ridiculous." Here, one more lining open. The tiny stitch sat there, patient as a seed. Before Warren could answer, a woman near the front stepped forward. She was wearing pearls and holding a small clutch with both hands. "That was mine," he said, pointing to the silver gown. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. "I wore it the year after my surgery. I told Warren I didn't want to go to the dinner." Helen rebuilt the bodice, so I could stand there without feeling everyone was staring at what I had lost. The room went very still. Another woman rose from a nearby table. "The navy one was mine," she said. "We lowered the hem and changed the sleeves after my husband died. I remember because she never once made me feel foolish for crying." In the fitting room, Helen looked down. One by one, they stood, not all at once, would have felt staged. It happened the way courage often happens, one person making room for the next. A cream dress, a black jacket, Mrs. Porter's green gown. Each woman spoke only a little, for each voice placed another thread back into Helen's hands. Warren's face changed by degrees. At first irritation, then disbelief, then the pale, pinched look of a man realizing that charm could not smooth a torn seam. "These were atelier pieces," he said. Louder now. "Everyone here knows how design teams work." An older woman near the display looked at him for a long moment. "A team has names, Warren." No one laughed. That made it worse. Brielle stepped back from him, just slightly. Her eyes went from the dresses to the cards, from the cards to Helen, and finally to Warren. She understood enough. Not everything, perhaps, enough to know the room had shifted away from them. Nora touched the edge of the table, steadying herself. Her face had lost its earlier fear. "The committee will be revising the program acknowledgments," she said. "And the donor board has asked that future design credits be listed individually." It sounded polite. In that world, polite could be fatal. Warren looked around the room for someone to rescue him. There were no rescuers, and only women he had greeted for years, women whose gowns had carried Helen's quiet work while he took the applause. Helen had imagined this moment 100 ways. She had imagined anger, relief, triumph. But standing there, with every dress finally speaking, she felt something quieter. The room had not given her anything she had not already earned. It had only stopped pretending she had not earned it. Brielle left before dessert was served. Didn't make a scene. She gathered her small evening bag, whispered something sharp that Helen could not hear, and walked out through the side doors. Warren did not follow her. He was too busy trying to hold what was already falling apart. By the end of the night, no one asked Helen to defend herself. They asked about the stitches, about the linings, about whether she still took private clients. And several women embraced her carefully, as if she were made of something both strong and newly mended. Nora found her after the last guests had begun to leave. "I'm sorry I waited so long," she said. Helen looked at the table, Mrs. Porter's note beneath the glass. "You opened the door tonight." Nora nodded. And for the first time all evening, she looked relieved. "You walked through it." In the weeks that followed, Warren's name did not vanish, and it lost its shine. Invitations slowed. Committees grew suddenly unavailable. Women who had once booked fittings through him began asking for Helen directly, and when he tried to explain, the explanations only made the silence around him larger. Brielle moved on to another circle, another set of lights. Without Warren's borrowed authority beneath her, her confidence looked thinner. She had wanted a brand. He had wanted the work. Helen did not go back to the old atelier. Instead, she rented a small studio with wide windows and a workroom, just large enough for 2 fitting forms. a table, and a row of dresses waiting for second chances. June helped paint the walls. Nora sent the first client. The women from the gala sent others. Helen named it second fitting. Not because dresses always needed fixing, because sometimes a woman did. The first dress she hung in the front window was not for sale. It was one she had made for herself, simple and graceful, with a lining finished by hand. Inside, where only she knew to look, feeble, with her own name sewn straight and firm. On opening morning, Helen unlocked the door and stood for a moment in the quiet studio. Sunlight fell across the work table. The old tin of needles sat beside a new pincushion. On the wall near the window, her name appeared in small black letters, neither hidden nor shouted. June came in carrying coffee and stopped beside her. "Well," she said softly, "look at that." Helen looked at the dress in the window, the empty chair, waiting for the first woman who would come in carrying something torn, outdated, or too painful to wear. She smiled, not widely, but fully. For the first time in a long while, her name did not need to be returned to her. It was already there, stitched where it belonged.